Rough Riders. Story continued from Hellhound fire tanks. We cannot stop their onward rush. The heavy tank leading the way. How I despise that one vehicle, having seen it destroy so many of our forces, slain so many of our allies, both fire warriors and Kroot. For a brief moment, I thought we had it. But a smaller vehicle came forward and protected it when our tide wall shields dropped for a moment, and a plethora of our Kroot forces surged forward. The smaller vehicle shot gouts of fire into our allies, and they were forced back. And just like that, more of the column formed up and caught up, and the moment was lost. No matter. We prepare for the mod car, the killing blow. We draw them in. Curse them, these mad, god-worshipping barbarians, but they are making it difficult. As a leader of the humans, or Govasa forces here, it is a wonder to watch my own race. The horror of what they are. Base, ignorant, fanatical killers. Though we have the same genes, it is impossible for me to believe that we are the same. Just look at them. How they die in their droves, and merely leap over the bodies of their own dead to get at us. They do so with a mad glint in their eye, a soullessness that can only be sated with the blood of their foes. They are like a rabid beast that will destroy themselves while trying to do the same to everyone and everything in this galaxy. The fanatics of the Imperium. They must be stopped. Our tide walls move forward and hem them in, forcing them down an ever-narrowing trench to get closer to our power reactors. They head for them as the primary target, of course. They have just enough wisdom remaining to know that if our reactors are taken out, then the tidal walls and much of our firepower will cease. We'll be open and vulnerable to their box barrage fire, coming from the fields of artillery stationed in their rear. I've seen the footage. It is as we have planned. But as always, the Imperium gains advantage due to its sheer cruelty. For what I see, I cannot abide. It makes me sick to the very pit of my stomach. For there it is. One of their many surprises. One we could never predict. The valley was controlled. We thought we had everything factored. Had scouted extensively, and clearly more than the lazy, mindless opposition. But here they are anyway. For it is obvious why we did not spot them. Our forces crested the valley on either side, charging down towards the main lines of the Imperium at the bottom. Our drones shielded the fire warriors that came up behind them, sniper drones adding to their own fire down into the mad onrush of our enemy. Orderly and organized, as always. But these are not normal warriors, if such a word can ever be used in a description of Imperial soldiery. They stand in disciplined lines and fire up to an extent and with an accuracy that we did not predict. Usually the lines of guard only have antiquated las guns, but these warriors, these firstborn, they are definitely cut above. Standing behind the two lines deep columns of Ogrins, they hold and exchange fire with our fire warriors, purely out of the range of normal lasgun fire. Little rattling sniping up at our drones to strip away protection, so their ranked lines of fire crash into our warriors and Kroot alike, knocking down entire sections of our lines or charges in a second. But it is worse, for a new force arrives on the field. They still wear the ridiculous and disgusting column of clearly animal fur on their heads, the barbarians, but they are atop beasts of burden. Not armoured personnel carriers, not hover vehicles, not even open-top vans, but animals. It is why we did not detect them with all of our careful scanning. The scum. But beasts of burden or not, they are fast and aggressive. As with everything that the Imperium touches, they have been twisted from placid and happy creatures of the fields into slavering monsters baying for the blood of their riders' enemies, of their riders' foes. The horror of it. And as we could not detect them, they strike hard, terrifyingly so. They crest over one valley edge and stand for a moment to almost herald their arrival, the light catching off their cuirasses, wind buffeting their banners and pennants. They seem to have sticks. Long metal sticks. They're actually going to attack our lines with sticks? But their bugles shriek out a long singular note, and then they charge. The beasts of burden thunder down into our men, but when they strike the lines, those sticks I mentioned, they have explosives on their tips. I witnessed men and drones being struck and ripped apart from the initial explosion. The shock of it all is hard on the fire warriors. Exploded and run down by the initial charge, the riders then bring out either pistols or their nightmarish blades, the swords that growl. And these madmen slaughter all before them. Our fire warriors break and attempt to run, but they are stopped as they crash into the back of the Kroot, who have not yet managed to break the Ogren lines on their flank. It becomes a bloodbath. The steeds, the beasts of burden, as fierce and devoted to killing and trampling as any of the Imperial humans or Ogren. Even they seem to be genuinely enjoying this horror. I cannot watch. So I do not. I will act. The instructions come down and I order my men to form up and we prepare to take vengeance. All of us seizing at this barbarity. Other regiments have had their chance, but we have been kept in reserve, along with those forces for the Montcar. And it happens right now. To be continued. Welcome, gentle listener. I am Voldemort, your faithful servant, and I wish to introduce you to the forces, factions, and units of the Warhammer 40k universe. The grim darkness of the far future, where there is no time for peace, there is only time for war. And today, we're to look at one of the oldest units in the game. For the Rough Riders of the Imperial Guard, now the Astra Militarum, have been around since near the very beginning of the game. Brought out in a White Dwarf magazine along with much of the main bulk of the units of the Imperial Guard that are still in play today, despite some changes from, say, White Shields to conscripts and the like. For even in the grim darkness of the far future, the simple cavalry unit is still in play. And so, as usual, for the very basics, let us lean on existing wisdom. To quote, I have seen war in all its forms. I have seen feral world savages braining each other with stones, and I have monitored the death of a whole planet at the hands of a virus bomb. I have seen space marines drop to certain death and win. I have seen titans crush whole platoons underfoot. But there is no more stirring sight in war than a charge of massed cavalry. Dravin Gratz, 14th Charinga Regiment. Since the days of ancient terror, the cavalry charge has been one of the most impressive displays of battlefield power available to humankind. Be they oddly armed mercenaries on barely trained horses, or ranks of gleaming knights atop sturdy thoroughbreds, the ancient warriors of old could smash through infantry like a melter charge through hull plating, and the sheer psychological effect of such a charge could end battles as quickly as the damage it inflicted. In the endless wars of the late 41st millennium, where tanks and god machines bestride the battlefield, and void ships with thousands of crew hang in orbit, unleashing megatons of explosive death, the cavalryman and his trusted steed still have a vital role to play. The Astra Militarum, the Imperial Guard, often makes use of specialized cavalry units known as Rough Riders. Even with its legions of machinery and armored fighting vehicles, the Imperial Guard has a place for these mounted warriors. The majority of Rough Rider units are raised from worlds where it is still common for warriors to fight from horseback. On these planets, fierce nomadic clans and warrior horse lodges have perfected the art of mounted cavalry techniques through years of bloodshed. Rough Riders retain many ferocious customs of their technologically primitive homeworlds, such as ritual scarification and tribal tattooing. Their steeds are bred for toughness and aggression, and are often just as dangerous and ill-tempered as the warriors who ride them, sometimes more. In addition to selective breeding in environments often very different from that of ancient terror, and the use of genetic engineering, many mounts used by Rough Rider units are given biochemical treatments to enhance their combat potential, such as the Krieg mounts utilized by the Death Riders of the Death Corps of Krieg regiments. While the majority of Rough Riders are raised from feral, underdeveloped worlds, this is not exclusively the case. On some more advanced planets, the honor of riding a living steed to war is reserved for the elite classes, formalized horse warrior aristocracies that have accumulated generations of cavalry experience. A Rough Rider squad of skilled mounted cavalry can be an effective assault and skirmish force, able to move rapidly over the broken ground, climb steep slopes, and gallop along narrow ravines. However, it is more common to separate out mounted regiments from their counterparts and allocate Rough Rider squads to fight alongside conventional infantry regiments, where they serve in a variety of roles. Rough Riders are used to operate out on their own beyond the normal lines of communication, often deep inside enemy territory. They are able to forage and subsist off the land, and can function for extended durations with only the minimum of basic supplies. They possess a tactical advantage by employing living mounts rather than vehicles, which require neither fuel nor maintenance, and unlike their mechanical counterparts, cannot be as easily traced with Auspex or scanner. As such, Rough Riders are often utilized to harass enemy troop movements by means of hit-and-run tactics. Rough Riders are a potent force on the battlefield, utilizing mobility and speed to spearhead an attack as easily as carry out a flanking maneuver. Rough Riders can carry a variety of weapons, but the most deadly are their explosive-tipped hunting lances, derived from the lethal spearheads used by the cavalry on their homeworlds to hunt down large carnivorous animals. This weapon is constructed of a hollow, lightweight metal shaft tipped with a spear point, which is also connected to the impact fuse of the weapon's shaped charge. This small explosive charge is constructed to direct the blast and fragmentation towards the target and away from the user. Once detonated, the user is left with only the shaft, which is then usually discarded. In close quarters combat against densely packed enemy or in close confines, the lance is very unwieldy, and all Rough Riders carry at least one backup weapon. After the initial shock impact of the charge has been expended, a rider will reach for a lasgun or auto pistol. The thundering momentum of a cavalry charge as it crashes into the ranks of the enemy leaves only death and carnage in its wake. Those foes not impaled are trampled to death beneath the heavy hooves of the Rough Riders' powerful steeds. Another weapon often utilized by some Rough Rider regiments is the cavalry spear, a heavy weapon designed for use as a part of a mounted charge. These weapons are utilized by Rough Rider regiments that eschew the use of traditional hunting lances, preferring something they can use multiple times over the course of an extended encounter. There are a number of different Imperial Guard forces that employ Rough Riders cavalry within their units, including, but not limited to, the following: Atalan Rough Riders, Death Riders of Krieg, Azelti Lancers, Gantor Riders, Kanak Skull Takers, Karak 21st Heavy Lancers, Krum 16th Ironsides, Matreb 99th Ragers, Palladius Freelancers, Praetorian Guard Hussars, Piran Dragoons, Remus Crushers, Rhinon 3rd Rough Riders, Sevlar Chem Riders, Talan Desert Riders, and Vostroyan Hussars. The following are just a small selection of some of the varied and exotic steeds that have found their place upon the battlefields of the grim darkness of the far future. Erthexi. The Erthexi is a large and aggressive reptilian predator with a foul temper and an impressive capacity to devour raw flesh at startling speeds. Its large body is supported by massive muscular forelegs that allow it to power forward through its native jungles on the world of Werslaug, and seize prey before tearing it apart with its vicious jaws. By contrast, its hind legs are short and stubby, keeping its mighty frame stable and low to the ground. Several regiments on the Spinewood front in the Calexis sector have been assigned to master the riding of this creature, including the Karak 21st Heavy Lancers. The Karak are renowned for both their effectiveness on the battlefield and their incredibly low rates of injuries that their riders suffer from the insatiable Erthexi. After generations of training the beasts, less than 1 in 4 soldiers suffer mounted-related incidents that require the implantation of bionic limbs during their active duty careers. The 83rd Lugnum Sewer Rats were also assigned Erthexi as cavalry mounts in a move by the Departamento Militarum that surprised all involved, most especially the members of the 83rd, who had been expecting equipment for the close-quarters tunnel clearing for which their regiment is renowned. Pressed into service as Rough Riders, however, the Lugnum adapted to their circumstances, and the 83rd became a capable, if not exceptional, Rough Rider regiment that earned several minor distinctions on Helvara. The Airthexi proved capable of surviving the ash wastes at least as well as their riders, and so the Lugnum 83rd was instrumental in securing portions of the Drury-Coburn line exposed to the volcanic surface of the planet. Giant Reptile. Utilized by the fearsome Catachan jungle fighters, who field rough riders mounted atop the mighty reptiles native to their deadly jungles, giant reptiles are a relatively common lifeform throughout the galaxy, especially on death and feral worlds, where they are often the main predator type. A giant reptile typically ranges in size from that of a Space Marine assault bike to that of a Land Raider, is possessed of considerable strength and ferocity, and has vicious natural weapons ranging from sharp bony protrusions and claws to jaws capable of ripping open the hull of a Rhino APC. It is quite common for the worlds from which the Space Marines recruit to have such lethal predators stalking the inhospitable terrain, and for young aspirants to prove themselves by slaying one of these immense beasts and taking a trophy to prove his ascent to manhood. Needless to say, few make it back alive. Carnosaurs prowl the blasted wastes of the Triath sector, and the infamous Arcanodonts, top of the evolutionary ladder on the honeycombed mining world of Mordant, are sold across the segmentum as vicious pets and status symbols at a great cost in both life and raw meat. The Grox. Easily one of the most common and well-known creatures within the Imperium. A Grox is an enormous reptilian beast used for everything from farming to food. Given their role as livestock, the creatures are overly aggressive and excessively territorial. However, it is these traits that mean that, when properly motivated, Grox make for adequate, if dangerous and difficult to control, steeds. Grox whips are said to have been named for herding these creatures, but few are willing to attempt to use such an instrument on a Grox, lest they provoke its considerable ire. When enraged, the creatures become nigh impossible to control. However, they also have a tendency of running rampant across anything in the proximity, including one's foes, causing considerable havoc and devastation as the riders desperately cling to their backs and wait for the storm to subside. As such, certain regiments on the Spinewood front have been known to use these creatures as pack beasts and occasional mounts. The presence of Grox on a battlefront can have a positive impact on morale despite the creature's nature, however, as their cooked flesh is, if nothing else, better than field rations. Further, given their massive stature, only a few Grox need to fall in any engagement to keep their meat in steady supply. Of course, eating one's steed might seem a bit macabre to some guardsmen, while others take to it with considerable gusto. The Horse. The mainstay of most Rough Rider regiments throughout the Imperium. Terran horses are the result of countless generations of selective breeding to make them powerful runners that are highly responsive to their riders. Rugged and reliable, these trusty steeds have carried the Astra Militarum to victory across innumerable battlefields on thousands of worlds throughout the centuries. Krieg steeds. The Death Corps of Krieg have their own unique Rough Rider formation known as the Death Riders. Like the individual Krieg soldiers, their mounts, called Krieg steeds, are faceless creatures clad in heavy rebreathers and devoid of any hair. These creatures were once standard Terran horses, but years of genetic manipulation has created a superior breed, one that willingly charges into the thickest of fighting without a single thought for its own safety or survival. Maru. Discovered by the Brygan dynasty of rogue traders on a world deep within the Coronos expanse, the majestic winged feline creatures known as Maru were brought to the Calixis sector, where they became an instant marvel within many noble circles. Their pelts and exquisite wings sat within grand banquet halls, and living specimens were paraded to entertain and fascinate the aristocracy. Maru breed at a tremendous and almost uncontrollable rate, and what had once been a rare beauty was fast becoming an innumerable pest. It was Trinus Brygan, one scion of that rogue trader dynasty, who first determined that the creature could be used as passable if capricious mounts, and began selling the creatures to certain elements of Imperial Guard regiments in the Spinewood front. Mukali. The Mukali is a creature perfectly adapted to a life of stifling heat and shifting sands. Tall and long-necked, Mukali have wide, padded feet that help them across soft sand drifts and often perilous desert terrain. Mukali tend to be passive creatures and extremely slow to anger. This makes them unsuited to combat, yet they are still used by numerous Rough Rider regiments, especially those that hail from the sands of Talarn. Mukali are particularly useful as mounts because of their sheer stamina, which allows them to cross vast swathes of inhospitable environments without rest. These hardy beasts can go for long periods of time without any food or water. This makes them an attractive proposition for long campaigns where resupply is difficult. In fact, Mukali are usually much more resilient than their riders, and so their ability to endure is rarely put to anything resembling a true test. Those Talon Desert Raider Rough Rider regiments that employ Mukali use the beasts to strategically outmaneuver their foes, using the tireless creatures to ride for days so that they can strike from angles that are unexpected. Venumex. No records exist of when the Venumex was introduced to the Calexis sector, although small colonies of this peculiar carnivorous lizard are found on jungle-heavy worlds across the sector, and even within a few worlds of the Coronas expanse. The Venumex is gangly, lean, walking on 2 legs, and is perfectly adept at hunting smaller animals for food. It also produces a mild toxin that it can spit from its mouth to slow larger prey. The Venumex has been used on several worlds that other mounts cannot tolerate, and the Rough Rider regiments that have been assigned these creatures as mounts speak highly of their durability, if not their friendliness or pleasant smell. Ursir. Large 6-legged omnivores from the frozen worlds of Mordrubio IV in the Coronas expanse. Ursir are the favoured mounts of the Matreb 99th Ragers. Known on their home world for attacking their prey with their slashing claws and crushing jaws, these muscular predators are covered in a thick fur that slowly adapts to the colour of their current surroundings as they shed. Despite their size, Ursir move with a loping gait that allows them to cover vast amounts of terrain much faster than expected. Ursir are independent creatures, but can be ridden by those patient or willful enough to try. They are particularly deadly fighters when enraged, capable of rearing up on their hind legs to smash their prey with their front legs, though this maneuver often proves equally dangerous to the first-time riders, especially when the Ursir decides on its own to strike. Arsenox. The Arsenox is a massive, moderately territorial herbivore that hails from a forgotten world in the Coronas expanse. Characterized by its bulky quadrupedal frame, thick and segmented hide, and imposing horns, one of which sprouts from its nose, and another pair of which form an imposing crest on its head. The Belaroth rogue trader dynasty brought this creature to various agri-worlds across the Calexis sector in the hopes that it could be harvested for food and used as a plough beast. However, the Arsenox's seemingly placid nature belied a stubborn cunning and a tendency to erupt into occasional extreme violence that caused most farming populations to simply release the creatures into the wild. When the war began on the Spinewood front in the Calexis sector, and resources on certain worlds grew scarce due to heavy tithes, several agri-worlds gathered the wild creatures and sent them as part of their requisite contributions. Though the Arsenox were initially slaughtered for food, certain regiments such as the Rhinon 3rd Rough Riders, who had recently lost their horses to a plague, discovered that it was easier to ride the creatures than to eat them. Despite their thunderous charges, Arsenox are notable for being one of the few mounts capable of carrying an Ogryn into battle without cybernetic augmentation. End quote. The Rough Riders, a wonderful unit with such a strong pedigree. Even in the sci-fi world of Warhammer 40k, there is still a place for the grandeur and romance of the cavalry charge, despite how horrific the reality may be, or perhaps because of it. And they permit such wonderful opportunities for kit bashing. What this means is that there are no official models from Games Workshop at the present, and have not been for some time if memory serves, but that they can be made from other kits. One might say a cavalry unit from the fantasy line, the Age of Sigmar, then use a unit of Astra Militarum to complete the riders. The kit bash is something I thoroughly endorse. The highest form of mad expression and creativity in all of the hobby, some might say, and I may just be one of them. But there has been some contention as the unit itself, as it does not have a model, has been left out of the latest edition codex, meaning that the unit has been relegated to a list called Legends, Forces that are no longer supported will never change and are slightly overcosted, some say. They cannot be used in most tournaments. But please do bear in mind that if you are a new player, unless you wish to embark on a tournament training program and then potentially complete, this status means absolutely nothing. Match players may request no Legends units be used, but in a friendly non-competitive game there is actually simply zero reason you cannot field them. For sometimes it is not about winning or losing, using the units in a game because they are OP or extra efficient, but simply because they look and play the way you think is cool. And for me, that is the second rule. Rule 1, have fun. Rule 2, the rule of cool. If you think something is cool, then there need be no further discussion. Example. Using Eldar Knights, eh? You know they don't have the weapon diversity of Imperial or Martian, and are overcosted. Don't care. They're cool. Discussion ends, game continues. And let that be your mantra this year. The rule of cool. Do what you think is cool, no matter what anybody else says. Always. I have been Voldemort, your faithful servant. I hope you've enjoyed this brief introduction to Rough Riders. If so, then please do consider liking and subscribing. If you do, then hit the notifications button, as I would not want you to miss out. If you see the worth in what we are doing, then do also consider joining our Patreon, or giving the video a share if that is beyond your present scope. It would be a great boon. Now, no matter what you do today, do try to make some time for fun. Toodaloo.